welcome everyone. In the interest of time, we will get going. My name's Bruno. I'm from the Cambridge Crystallographic Data Centre. I was going to give a brief introduction to the session. First, I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respect to their elders, past and present. This is an RDA session, just a reminder of the guiding principles that are at the heart of the RDA community around openness, consensus and harmonization, driven by the community, neutral and inclusive. So introduction to this particular session on enabling effective data curation in the long tail of the physical sciences. The aim that we had coming into this was to share practices and approaches from across the community that could help more effective curation of data sets, which we've sort of characterized as those being in the areas of the physical sciences where standards are lacking. We want to ultimately focus in particular on the need to ensure that these data are sufficiently documented and described so that they can be more effectively reused within and across domains. But we also want to make sure we've got a bit of time towards the end just to see if there's interest in further activity within the RDA focused specifically on data curation and the physical sciences. The approach we're going to take is we'll have a little bit of scene setting, and that's going to be framed with the UK initiative for physical sciences data infrastructure, which was in part what sort of provided the inspiration for sort of putting this session together and getting people together to talk through what we've now got is sort of 3 case studies where 3 of us will provide a brief presentation. And as we were talking about this, we decided we wanted to focus on what has worked and where there has been success, and then provide people with an opportunity to question and discuss, what are the factors that, have proved successful, which might be applicable when you're thinking, about doing better curation in areas where perhaps the practice isn't quite so strong. And then hopefully we'll have time for some general discussion in addition to that about, how we might as a community continue to work in this particular area together. These are just a taste of the broader questions just for you to have in your mind as we're going through thinking about what opportunities there might be for broader collaboration across communities and what further activity within RDA might be beneficial. So this is the running order. Nicola in a minute will introduce the physical sciences data infrastructure. Then we'll have our 3 case studies around crystallography, the data curation network, and NFDI for chem. So with that, I think I can hand over to Nicola to give the PSDI introduction. If you follow the link in the program, you will find some collaborative notes. Please feel free to interact with those.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ian. So I'm Dr. Nicola Knight. I'm the coordinator for the Physical Sciences Data Infrastructure, which is a project in the UK. I recognise some familiar faces from the presentation I gave yesterday, so some of this I might kind of skip over a little bit. But I'm going to talk a little bit about PSDI, what we do, kind of why we care about data curation, and some of the things that we're doing before we go into, obviously, a bit more detail from the individual case studies. So we are aiming to provide a data infrastructure to connect across experimental and computational facilities. Currently, we are kind of mainly focusing on chemistry, materials, but also those related disciplines, and basically enable more to be done with the research data that is funded through the UK kind of initiatives, because realistically data underpins all of the research that we do. So having high quality data is really, really critical to all of that elements of everything that we do, and also being able to support that beyond the individual lifespan of like a research project. So currently we have a kind of a collection of people working on projects and working on PSDI resources. So we have about 20 institutions that are currently involved in PSDI, ranging from national scale facilities down to kind of more local projects. So this probably won't be too kind of out there for anybody, but obviously in terms of some of the barriers and challenges. So we have kind of barriers that are in some of the data things. So in terms of having this structured data sets that people like really require in order to be able to reuse it in a way that is not locked away, that is well described, and actually, you can store the data. So obviously that's like a big kind of barrier or challenge sometimes in overcoming that. Obviously the technology that goes alongside with handling that data around the formats and the standards and the interoperability between the software, but quite critically, a lot around the people So whether that's the research culture around adopting these things, the actual knowledge and skills around this sort of data management, data stewardship and data curation, but also the time and resource available kind of to actually undertake these actions around creating high quality data that can be reused. So within the PSDI, we kind of have those 4 areas that kind of, so 3 of them from the previous slide, that are kind of our principles. So the additional one is obviously around connecting existing infrastructures, so building on things that have already happened. And then obviously best use of data, which is kind of around getting this structured data, the metadata, enabling these workflows to give you good, high-quality data sets, the best use of people, so building the skills base, and then the best use of technology. So this is kind of building these tools and services and utilizing these standards and kind of things like that to actually support the data that we're going and developing and using. So basically, that's kind of what we as PSDI do, but I'm going to do a very light touch on some of the stuff we're doing around data curation-related activities. So obviously, in terms of actually the best use of data, one of our key things is around building high-quality data collections. So these are well-structured, well-described, like curated data sets that can be trusted by the community to be able to be reused. There's also the ability to, like, where we're building up community data collections, so where there's potentially community curation, and this also includes things where there's more provenance around the data, the domain-specific metadata, and the ability to build those curation pipelines into those data collections. We're also building a couple of services and guidance things around things to do with data formats, or like things around DMPs and metadata, and I'll come back to these ones at the bottom because we're doing a lot of activities around data curation. That's in terms of workshops, but also building some guidelines. So in terms of obviously some of these things around like building the skills base and stuff, I'm going to quickly highlight a new network that has recently been launched in the UK. So this is by one of our co-Is from PSDI, who unfortunately can't be here, but this is called CASDAR, so it's the Careers and Skills for Data-Driven Research. So this is a new network plus that will be running for 4 years, and it is much broader than the physical sciences. It's all around data stewardship, but across any domain. So this is all about building this community, establishing kind of a bit more, especially in the UK, these career pathways and professionalization for data stewardship, and enabling that cultural change. So we had a big movement with the research software engineers and sort of trying to potentially have that same initiative and impetus, but for data stewardship. So if you're interested in data stewardship and kind of network activities and stuff, do go check this out. It's just very recently launched, and they're building up a lot of activities around that. But back to the data curation work that we're doing. So this is a piece of work. So as partners of the PSDI projects, we have the Digital Curation Centre and the Cambridge Crystallographic Data Centre. It's lots of C's and D's in this little partnership. And this is about recommendations about how PSDI can and should support data curation within the UK physical sciences communities. So we've done some workshops, and they're currently writing a report. But this is kind of what are the existing guidance tools and services that kind of support the data curation, but also what might be needed in the future? What are those requirements that are specific to the physical sciences versus those requirements that are more broad and kind of general data requirements? And then how could an initiative like PSDI address those needs in terms of whether it's guidance, creation of tools, whether that's training, and kind of actually undertaking the curation ourselves? Obviously, that's a big ask, but is that something that we should be doing? And obviously, the collaboration and kind of this community kind of awareness building. And so this kind of allows, hopefully, a couple of maybe areas of thought for when we're going through the case studies and coming into the discussion. So in terms of the current sort of areas that are outlined to go into the report, the first question: what exactly is data curation? Where does this fit within the research life cycle? What kind of comes under the banner of data curation? What's beyond kind of the wrapper of data curation, and kind of how does that split up? And where do the kind of roles and responsibilities fall in terms of what might come under data curation? Is that for specifically the data curator role or other roles within different stakeholders? Those community benchmarks, so whether there are different aspects, so specifically something like the core trust seal or kind of other sort of areas within the community, guidelines for best practice, and whether I mentioned whether that's domain-specific or domain-agnostic areas, what's specific to like the physical sciences and what is more general. Covering some case studies, so you'll hear a couple of case studies kind of here, but also like that going a little bit further into some different areas. Looking at the interoperability and the integration, so how you can actually join up the recording kind of across the different sort of areas, those workflows, integrating different platforms to really connect up the different elements of kind of the data handling, the data curation across the whole life cycle. And then reflecting a little bit on terms of some of the community needs that have been identified at the different engagement activities that we've done within PSDI data curation roadshows, but also at other events that we've done. And then crucially kind of filling that up and doing some sort of recommendations for PSDI in terms of what we should be doing in order to enable data curation in the physical sciences. So some of these areas will potentially come up in some of the case studies, and hopefully they'll give you a couple of, well, lots of things to think about or discuss. So I am going to pass over to Ian, who's going to come and give the first case study.
Thank you, Nicola. And I think, hope with the report as well is that will be useful to the wider community. And obviously, we kind of want to make sure that we get input from others on this about best practice and think about how we can learn from what's been going on, what people are doing. And so this first case study I was encouraged to do to sort of talk through the sort of lessons that we can take from the crystallographic area. I think many look at crystallography and say there's lots about that area where there's a lot that's being doing right. And so what I'm going to try and tease out here are some of the elements that have perhaps led to success in this particular domain. There are a number of different established crystallographic databases, each with a slightly different focus. We have the protein data bank that looks at biological macromolecules. We have the inorganic crystal structure database, which looks at inorganic ones. We have a database dedicated to powder diffraction, and then the Cambridge structural database, which looks at organic, metal organic, and it's the one I'm going to be focusing on. Between us, we have decades of experience of curating structural data. We're different organizations, but we have some shared experiences and in some cases work with common frameworks. So I'm going to look at a data journey of a crystal structure from the point at which the data might be generated as it makes its way into a repository, published in some shape or form, and then sort of what might happen to it afterwards as well. One thing that crystallography benefits very much from is having a well-established standard for capturing many aspects of the results of the experiment that are undertaken. It's not just the model of the crystal structure, it's details of the sample, it's information about the equipment and the experimental conditions that were used, it's the software packages and parameters and different levels of data and even, publication details. And another key part here, and I apologize for the formatting thing there, is that these days, the crystal structure refinement software makes it really easy for researchers to save SIFs with most of that information. And so they don't have to do much. They just have to do their science, save out a file, submit it to a repository. The SIF framework is extensible and flexible, so it started off with sort of chemical crystallography, but then it's evolved to take on protein crystallography and have specific sort of data terms and structures for powder as well. And it is endorsed and maintained and overseen by the IUCR on an ongoing basis. It's not just the file format that we have, it also has a service that allows people who've generated one of these files to submit it and get some kind of validation and verification of the data set itself. So this is a service called CheckSIF that was developed and is maintained by the IUCR, identifies required data that might be missing. It looks for inconsistencies across the data and maybe points to where there may be errors or issues that need to be addressed. And ultimately, it comes out with indicators of different levels of severity, and those can be worked into policies around publication that, some journals may require severe alerts to either be addressed or explained. We incorporate that service as part of a deposition service that was developed by CCDC, but now sort of jointly accepts structures that might be going to the Cambridge Structural Database or the inorganic crystal structure database. And our aim here is to try and make it as easy as possible for the researcher who has to submit their data to go through the relevant steps. And this includes, for example, launching CheckSIF. If there are alerts, they can actually provide their explanations there and then in this service. And if they do that, they get written back into the CIF. So as a result of that, you're enriching the file that's been deposited as well. There's a session I was in, I think there may have been today, where there was conversation about duplicate data sets. So the other thing we can do is spawn a search across the known crystal structures, which if someone's depositing something new and they think they've got something novel, they may be in for a shock, or they can identify other structures that might be relevant to their particular science and include those in their write-up. And I think there's aspects here about providing something of value back to the crystallographer when they're actually depositing their data, which makes it useful for them. And I think if you look at the protein data bank in particular, the act of depositing a structure has become a real important part of the experimental workflow, because the sort of level of detail that the report that's provided back from that is deemed to be really useful to the researchers in understanding whether they've got issues in their data that might need to be addressed. And the final part I want to highlight from our deposition workflow is providing opportunity for people to add additional information that might not be in their file. We want to try and get this as soon as we can, ideally from the person who generated, the person who might have the most knowledge to be able to provide things like properties of the crystal or different additional facets as well. So that takes us up to the point of publication, and I want to sort of now just say a little bit about what we do at CCDC once it's been deemed that a structure can be made publicly available. And that's where our in-house team of data curators sort of come in and start enriching the data so it can be more widely reused. And particularly in our domain, a really important part here is having a representation of the chemical structure that's been studied, and that's critical for for downstream use. And we do this using a combination of automated and manual processing. Used to be all manual, but then with 60,000 structures coming into the CCDC, each year, there's no way we can actually do that. So we take advantage of tools that will try and do this automatically, but importantly will report back on the reliability that it thinks it has done that, and it's drawing on machine learning to do this. This helps obviously cope with the workflow, but in a way that enables us to prioritize the manual validation that might be necessary. At the moment, all structures do get looked at by a human, but some, if they're particularly straightforward, only need a quick check. It's obviously about the individual data sets and making these available, but really one of the strengths of the Cambridge Structural Database, and similar in the other databases, is that collection of data that provides you with knowledge that transcends individual experiments. And so we have a range of different tools that we develop at CCDC that try and enable you to apply the data and the knowledge you can derive from it to different areas. But just wanted to really make the point here that the curation is essential for enabling this. Enabling scientists across academia and industry to address particular challenges. This also means that we need to be actively curating as well, because the needs of our user communities change. Our ability to improve the data changes. And so every year we have a number of sort of projects that we identify where we can go back and improve existing structures, whether this be identifying subsets that might be particularly useful or enhancing particular data items to make them more organized and more useful, which is particularly important in the context of machine learning and AI. So my kind of summary of what I think have been some of the key enablers over the time in terms of achieving this. First and foremost, standard semantic file formats, that not just that the file formats exist, but they've been widely adopted by key software tools and platforms, but supported by validation services, but also guidance and best practices. The International Union of Crystallography pioneered the use of SIFs in their publication workflows and then said to other publishers, look, this can be done, you should do this too. And the publishers on the whole paid attention, which then has led to sort of integrations with the publishers to, try and make sure that we're ensuring between this best practice when people are publishing their data and alongside articles. We have automated tools to be able to keep up with the curation requirements and are curating throughout the data life cycle. And then because we've got this collection of knowledge and the tools that exploit it, others have developed other methodologies, and it just demonstrates the value back to the community of having well-curated data and just makes people a lot more willing to do better by their data themselves. So those are the key points. I've got some acknowledgements for all the people who make that happen, but now's a chance to sort of have any discussion or questions that we might want about crystallography for 10 minutes or so. Yeah. You're there.
I'll be the runner.
So you mentioned that you obviously have an in-house team of curators. What sort of size is that team?
That's a good question. I should know because I'm a member of that team. We have a team of 3 or 4 what we call deposition coordinators who primarily are the people who are dealing with the front line. So they tend not to be scientific experts. They're the ones who structures that come through that deposition service. They're sort of looking at results of simple duplication checks where we're seeing, is this the same data set that's been submitted before, working through updates, corresponding with authors to do that particular point. Then a team of sort of like, I'd say 6 or 7 scientific editors, but increasingly they do more things these days than just curate structures. So as we've introduced the sort of more automated workflows, we've been able to get them involved in other things as well. So yeah, that's the answer to the question. So yeah, it's not a small team, and I know in other organisations you might be lucky to have 2 or 3 people doing the whole thing. But, so we are lucky to have a team of around 10 to sort of like have oversight of that. But as I say, it's looking at activities that go beyond just curating the data as well.
When was the standard format developed, and how long did it take to develop, and how long did it take to be adopted?
Okay, the original SIF was 1992 or 3, I think it was published. I think I've looked at sort of the uptake of electronic deposition. It probably took about 8 to 9 years before we got to 80 or 90% of people depositing electronically using that file format. There were some interesting sort of stages in between where people would generate the SIF file and then put it into a PDF in the supplementary information, because that's, of course, the best way of making your data available. But yeah, I think as we sort of worked on the workflows with different publishers, then I think once you get 1 or 2 publishers doing this, then that can catalyze it, because people, regardless of which publisher they're submitting to, will just start doing the same thing. I've also looked at the uptake of MMSIF, which is the sort of PDB equivalent, and I think it took them several years to develop it. It's taken them over a decade to get the community to sort of actually move over to it. And it took the PDB saying, we're just not going to support the old file format anymore. But then they had to invest in enabling people to sort of move over and adapt their tools to use the new stuff. So it can take time.
So another question about the SIF format. So is this exploitable when it comes to fair data? So are there fields that can make the data findable and so on?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when we do a sort of assessment of fair practices, certainly within CCDC, and I think this applies across crystallography, I think the existence of SIF speaks to various aspects of the FAIR principles. It's not just a syntactic format, it's underpinned by dictionaries that define the specific data items in a semantic way. And so I think it addresses a lot of the requirements of FAIR principles to enable reuse by machines. Now, it's interesting that we tend to take that and machine process it into a more structured database, and the sort of CIF, the original CIF part's been left behind. There are other people, though, who'll take an archive of CIFs and write programs that operate across it and do that sort of thing.
So I recall seeing a presentation some years ago from, I think from someone from the International Union of Crystallographers about that checking process, and particularly the fact that not only are they doing the one-off check, I presume using CheckSIF, although I can't remember the name of the tool they described at the time, but that periodically, as that tool was improved, they were doing retrospective checks on data files that had gone to the journal, and occasionally picking up instances of potential fraud from some things back. What wasn't clear to me is it the journal carrying that out? Is it the archives like you carrying out those processes, or?
So that's a very interesting question. So I suspect that if this was several years ago, I think there was something that somebody noticed when they started looking at the process data. So I think in crystallography we tend to think in three levels. You've got the raw data that comes off the diffractometer. You've got the process data from which the final model is sort of generated. And initially you just deposited the final model. That's all anybody could cope with. But then you started to be able to cope with the process data, which allows you to go back and re-refine. And it also allows you to do other sorts of checks. And that's where they discovered, particularly in an IUCR journal, they managed to plot a chart that said, frankly, all these structures are the same as being generated from the same data set. Somebody's been dodgy here, and you could track it back to motives are related to the pressure to publish, to get ahead and stuff like that. Then more recently, there was an article published about a prolific paper mill which was using metal organic frameworks, and there were articles written claiming all sorts of magical properties of these. And a lot of those had crystal structures associated with us. Now, up until about that point, we would say we're not the crystallographic police. That's down for the peer review process to do that. Now we are paying a lot more attention to doing what we can as new structures come in and looking retrospectively to see if we can find structures that are suspect. I'd say it's a very small percentage. We worry about that small percentage. It takes a lot of compute time to do these sorts of comparisons, but yeah, I think that's been a shift in what we see as our responsibility now.
Do you think one more?
Yeah, probably. Yes, definitely one more.
I was just going to say on that point specifically, do you think that sort of having almost a research integrity team at a data repository is going to become a requirement in the future? Are you going to have your own methods of investigating and formal processes?
Yeah, they are called Natalie, and so it was before the paper mill actually, but yeah, it was someone who did a PhD around the area of crystallography, and we took them on a sort of short-term basis, but they were interested in the sort of integrity and fraud stuff, and so I think now again some of a reaction to this is sort of we have someone whose responsibility it is to build up those workflows, and it's started more as a manual thing, and now we're looking to see how we can automate those flows. So I think, it has become perhaps more of a requirement to have that somebody with those particular skills, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a team. It could be that you've got an aspect of within the group of people curating, there is attention being paid to that sort of thing.
So that will form the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. So, thank you. I hope that was useful. I hope the discussion was useful. I think we're now going to hear from Shannon, who's going to tell us about.
Okay, hi. So I'm Shannon Farrell. I'm from the University of Minnesota, and I'm going to talk about the Data Curation Network. So I wanted to start this off just by giving a general introduction to the Data Curation Network, or what we call the DCN, so more Ds and Cs. Myself and the University of Minnesota are members of the Data Curation Network, but as you can tell from this slide, I want to say that although I say words like we and our, the DCN is a result of years of labor from countless years' worth of labor from countless individuals at a bunch of institutions. So they are all listed here. We're a community-led network of curators who are advancing open research by making data more ethical, reusable, and understandable. We're an active community of data stewards and curation practitioners who share knowledge and time to collaboratively curate research outputs and advance the data curation profession. We've been active since 2016, and we officially launched as a member-funded organization in July 2021. Our initial phase was funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. So the University of Minnesota, again, where I am, is the financial house of the Data Curation Network, and the director of the DCN is employed with us at the University of Minnesota. But there are 27 institutions in total that comprises over 70 data curators within the United States. So some of the things the DCN does are listed on this slide here. Of course, this includes curation. The 70-plus curators are the foundation of our cross-institutional curation network. The DCN also serves as an educational resource for data curators through workshops and what we call data curation primers, which I will talk about shortly, as well as we have community of practice that offers interest groups, professional development opportunities, and networking. So one of the biggest benefits of the DCN is our support of curation at scale. Institutional and data repositories, as I'm sure you all know, are seeing increasing deposits from a wide variety of disciplines in various formats. And through the DCN, institutional members who don't have the expertise, subject expertise or tool expertise, I should say, can ask for a DCN expert to curate these data sets or for help to work with an expert curator to learn how to curate them for future reference. So in practice, this is what the shared staffing curation workflow looks like. On the left-hand side, we have a DCN partner institution who receives data from an institution or from a researcher. The local curation team will triage that data set to decide if they're going to curate it by themselves or if they're going to send it to the DCN to get support from a DCN expert. When it's sent to the DCN, the coordinator matches the data set with the pool of available curators depending on the discipline and the format, like I mentioned before. A DCN curator then applies what we call the curated workflow, which again, I will talk about in a minute, and provides feedback and recommendations to the local institution who then closes the loop on their end with the researcher. To continue on about the workflow, we all use the tool called JIRA to track web data sets and who is working on them. This is where the coordinator will assign curators and keep track of where the data set is in the curation process. This is the curated workflow that I mentioned previously. It's primarily a teaching tool to help data curators, researchers, or students understand the various steps that go into our curation process. So you can read it, but curation stands for check, understand, request, augment, transform, evaluate, and document. This is the model that we also follow at the University of Minnesota in our regular curation activities. So we check all of the files to make sure they open, we read all of the included documentation, we try to understand the data, we request missing information, we ask for changes to the data set, and then we're augmenting the metadata by adding DOIs. We'll transform file formats to make them into preservation file formats using tools. We'll convert XLS to CSV, just as an example. And then we evaluate the data set for fairness by looking for licenses and so on. And we document all of these actions that we take by creating a curator log. We're also attempting to address any ethical concerns, such as checking consent form language, augmenting metadata to ensure terms and language used are appropriate, and so on. So another output and resource that I wanted to draw some attention to that I mentioned before is the database of primers that the DCN has created. So a primer is a peer-reviewed living document that details a specific subject, disciplinary area, or curation task that can be used as a reference to curate research data. There's 46 primers that are listed at the website at the bottom of this slide. All of these primers are public on the web on GitHub. There's not only curators from the DCN authoring these documents, sometimes researchers are getting involved. So for instance, on the CARE primer that we have, there were researchers that were contributing. And I just put some up here that are physical science related examples. So one example of a primer that might apply to this crowd is the mass spectrometry primer. And again, I made a little shorter link for you here. All of the primers have a similar structure, part of which is highlighted here, describing common file formats, known repositories, recommended open formats, how to convert files, and so on. So for curators like myself, these primers help us understand the common types of data found within different disciplines. On this slide, I'm highlighting the section that prepares a curator on what questions to ask or what issues they should be looking for when they're curating a data set. And then these primers just list steps that a curator should take while reviewing a data set. So for example, identifying the open file formats, seeing if proprietary formats can be converted, and so on. Another project that the DCN has been working on that I wanted to draw some attention to is the development of curriculum. So in fall 2022, the DCN started bringing together individuals that were interested in being part of a team that worked together on developing new resources for various types of specialized data. And these were, they focused on areas where the DCN recognized as gaps in the organization's expertise. So they wanted to build cohorts to facilitate knowledge sharing and to build expertise. Each team had a mentor who was also a member of the core project design team, and this helped connect the work going on across the cohorts. So the four cohorts that they had were simulation data, code, scientific images, and geospatial data. Well, the DCN was a hub to bring people together. These are the folks that did all of the hard work. Again, this is not my personal work, but two of my University of Minnesota colleagues were involved. Wenda Marsalik, who's the mentor for the simulation data, and Melinda Kernick, who worked on the geospatial data cohort. All of the cohorts developed lesson plans, slide decks for instructions, and they found existing real-life data sets to use in their exercises. Unfortunately, the second iteration of this grant was not funded, but they did just take the curriculum to the NIH, and they did a series of workshops there to bring people in. In the near future, they're going to be posting these trainings on GitHub, and they want it to be used by people to, in modules and to build their own curriculum. And while I was reviewing this work, I was just wondering if some of you, some of the work that you all do here and the data types that you work with could serve as another cohort in a future iteration. So, okay, so I've mentioned several times that we have over 70 curators in the network, but where does the subject expertise lie? The vast majority of folks' experience comes from the social and behavioral sciences, almost 39%, and then the life sciences at 27%, and this is where I fall. So only 16% of curators have expertise with the physical sciences and mathematics, and only 7% have experience with engineering. So this just breaks it down by discipline even further, and I've tried to highlight the physical sciences disciplines. You can see here there are very small percentages of the whole, and I realize this is almost impossible to read, but there's a lot of different disciplines represented. So one of the DCN's biggest challenges right now is we have very few curators with chemistry and materials science expertise. This is a challenge because we're seeing a lot of data sets that are coming from these disciplines. So this means that the curators who do have the expertise are getting overloaded and might not have the time to curate. And so we are looking for new curators with this specific expertise. On the other hand, what's going well? When asked what value does the DCN bring to your institution or to you as an individuals, curators list that people are pleased with the community and the camaraderie, they enjoy learning from one another, they deeply value the professional development that the DCN provides, because many curators didn't come in with these skills. They are learning on the job, but it can be intimidating and slow. There are also people in the DCN that are not curating at their institutions, but they're curating for the DCN. So they're learning through the DCN so that they're prepared if they do ramp up their own services at their institution. They value the additional expertise in the DCN that may not be available at all institutions. The DCN is helping individual institutions save money by not having to hire for every expertise area, right? So they can still provide comprehensive services. So anyway, to sum up with the DCN, I see it as playing a vital role in addressing some of our concerns related to the cost of data curation services at institutions and in helping with resourcing. We help spread out expertise and resources so that we don't all have to do it alone. We can work through problems together that we're seeing in our local environments and see if anyone else has seen similar issues or found solutions. So I went through that really fast. Yeah.
So for discussion, if we have questions that we want to pose. I think one, just you might have said it, and just to clarify, where are the data curators coming from? Are they mainly from the sort of library information sort of services? And I suppose the follow-on question is, have you thought about the scope of taking that out to the researchers themselves as a little thing that they can do to develop additional skills and also obviously contribute to the curation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm just trying to find that other slide again. So they're all at institutions, but these, I mean, most of them list that they're at libraries. And I think most of these data repository services are within libraries. We do, if you'll look closely, there's a couple of organizations, like the Michael J. Fox organization, that are not libraries, but the vast majority are. I think there's two. The other one is Dryad. So I think that's an interesting idea to bring in other curators. We have talked about it at our own institution, about looking within, because we built what we call a data manager network, which links all of the people who are doing that job within labs, departments, in various disciplines. And we've thought about how can we bring them in as curators, because they're on the ground doing the work, and I think that would get at some of our expertise gaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of interesting drawing analogies with the peer review process for articles. This is a form of peer review.
That's right, absolutely. Yeah. It's a form of peer review.
Yeah. Questions? Ooh, let's go a bit.
Hi, Michaela Miller from the Southern Ocean Observing System. I see that all of those are US-based institutions.
That's right.
Are you open to international collaboration or people from the outside of the US joining?
Yes, so we've talked about this, and one of the barriers right now is that every year there's, I don't want to call it mandatory, but it pretty much is a mandatory gathering. Where we all get together at one of the institutions and, do the business meeting and do presentations and talk about how it's going together as a network. And that is one of the stipulations of joining as a member. There's also a fee. And they require that at least one or two curators comes to that meeting on an annual basis. So if you have 6 people at your institution, it's a little bit easier to send people. But in terms of funding, internationally, I think it would be harder, more expensive. But I don't think we're closed off. I've never heard anyone say that. It's just, this has been the easy way. We have gotten questions from people in the EU and the UK about if they could join, and I don't think they're opposed to it. There is a review process that goes through, and as we grow, there's new challenges that come up with that as well. So
I think data curation means that you have to be an expert for that type of data, for that exact field. So my question is, how deeply do the curators look into the contents of the data, or is it more the metadata that is checked in the end?
Honestly, it depends. So I can't speak for every institution and how they're doing it, but even within my institution, we have 5 curators, and they all curate data differently. Because they're in different disciplines. So we have someone who's a social sciences expert and an R expert, and she literally opens every single R file and runs the code and checks if the packages are there and, checks for missing data and all sorts of things. So she's like deep diving into it. On the other hand, there could be times when you receive a genomic code, and so all you do is, does the file open, and is the metadata explaining what this is and how they generated it and what tool they need to open it. And so it really varies. On the other hand, and I know this is not is applicable to physical sciences, we have human participant data in some cases, and so we will be checking consent forms. We literally review to see what they said about data sharing, and then there's a deep dive into the data to check about are there any fields that need to be anonymized. So it depends. But I would say, like, to your point, so I'm considered a biological sciences curator. I'm looking at genomic data, I'm looking at environmental data, I'm looking at observational data. I mean, it's all over the place. And I have surface level, deep knowledge in one area, so my background's in ecology, but then surface level knowledge in the other areas, and so I can't go as deep, if that makes sense. But it's still like opening files and checking for missing data, and does it make sense? And sometimes I want to say, sometimes having less context and information is helpful, because then if someone else was opening that up, if I can't understand it, then they definitely can't. So,
inside these checks that are different between the disciplines, how do you think will be important, for example, try to create automations over these checks? Because when you started to increase the scale of the data that you arrive, obviously I can imagine this person that open 1,000 files
oh, that's right, yes.
is going to be crazy in just a matter of milliseconds.
Yeah, we have talked about that. I don't know of any. I should bring it back to the DCN and ask them if any one of our member institutions has done that yet. I know there are some that are exploring AI and creating READMEs and all sorts of things, but I haven't heard about like checking with files specifically. But I think that's a great idea. Because you're right, we get some stuff from the, even at our institution, where it's zipped up and it's 2,000 files.
Yeah, I'm speaking because I am a software engineer, and
yeah.
When you create a software, you create
That's right.
test automations in order to say, are this requirement, is failure, is yes, no, and whatsoever. You can have in real time a feedback that says, oh, there is something wrong here, and it's tended to spend. I mean, there is still a human factor, because even if you have the results, there is a human that's needed to understand the results that you need from the test. So the human factor is still needed to be present, but there are a lot of the hard work can be done by a machine very quickly
right.
in terms of correlations.
Yeah. Well, and I think, just to be completely honest and transparent, when we're getting those huge data sets right now, it's a spot check. You only open a few. Or many, but not the whole. So,
I guess that's an interesting aspect of automation, though, as a sort of skimming through some of the guides you showed. Often you write things out originally and you think, actually, how can I use a workflow to automate this? And I don't know, is that something that maybe there's been discussions about how actually you can sort of turn the instructions into something that's more automated?
Yeah, I think that is being discussed. So I didn't talk about it, but we have various communities of practice within the DCN too, and one of them is around like big data sets, and so that is something that they've talked about there, but I don't think anyone has come up with a solution. So.
Any other questions? I've got one or two. Well, this one might be a brief one. You mentioned some of them. Is there another domain-appropriate repository there? Is that then quite a quick sort of step for the curator, because it's to go back to the researcher and say, you're better off sending it there? Or is it more
so I don't know. No, that's a great question. So I'm going to separate myself as the University of Minnesota versus the DCN. At the University of Minnesota, we absolutely do that. If someone tries to deposit a data set into our institutional repository, we will look and see what was your grant, where are you submitting it? Maybe it should go in an actual disciplinary repository. When someone submits something to the DCN, we assume that they at their institution had already gone through those steps, and so it really just becomes part of the curation workflow, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. Then I think my final question is around what is the overhead required to actually run the DSN as a network?
Jeez, I should have written all that stuff down.
How many people roughly are involved in?
Yeah, well, like I
administering
said, 70 curators. We have a director. We have someone who's managing one of our grants right now, which is the Realities of Academic Data Sharing grant. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but there's someone in place to do that. And then the coordinator, so who's assigning data sets. And so it's really bare bones. The bulk of the work is coming from the institutions.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, and then, we have a finance person who has to deal with money and reimbursing people for flights and attendance to meeting, but
Yeah, but
yeah.
that's presumably coming from the host organisation.
Yeah, it's coming from our organization, and so that doesn't count.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, and I think, just as a final comment, I think we're talking, the focus of this is on the long tail, and I think, seeing that laid out, I think there's something in there about, the long tail really is long, and you need distributed expertise, and so it's interesting to think how you can build on that model to obviously bring in other expertise, but also make it more efficient.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to point out, because someone has asked me this numerous times as someone who runs an institutional data repository, we really are seeing a lot more of those smaller data sets, not the huge, computational ones that probably can live somewhere else. We really are seeing those scientists that live off in the, in the long tail. So that is what I would say primarily that the DCN is covering as well. So.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Felix.
I'm going to advance you so you're not stuck here. There you go.
Okay. Hello, I'm Felix Bach, one of the co-spokespersons of NFDI for Chem. And I'll talk today about the data curation in chemistry, so especially the workflows in our repositories. First, I have to explain NFDI for Chem is one consortium within the NFDI, the National Research Data Infrastructure in Germany, that started in 2018 and now just started the second funding period. And it's heavily funded by the federal government and the states in Germany. We are one of the natural sciences consortia. Here you see that many other areas are covered as well by such consortia. National research data infrastructure, that sounds a bit as if it would be only an infrastructure for Germany, but that's clearly not the case. We want to be an international endeavor, and we are closely connected to RDA, to IUPAC, to EOSC and GoFair and these kinds of initiatives as well. This is the composition of the consortium. So as you see, many of the big universities are part of the consortium, as well as research institutes, and the learned societies are present as well all over Germany. Our approach is to cover the full data life cycle in chemistry with tools and processes and trusted seamless workflows. And for the chemists, this starts in the laboratory. So we recommend that the chemists use electronic lab notebooks that are able to be connected to their measurement devices and automatically can capture the data, can transfer the data over, and capture the whole context of the data creation in a structured format already. And that makes it then quite easy to transfer the data over to our repositories where the data can be published, so it gets a DOI and together with rich metadata, but also in the repositories, the long-term archiving is ensured for at least 25 years, we guarantee that. In NFDI for Chem, we focus on data that is describing molecules and their properties and reactions. And hence, we have to deal with many data types, many formats, many structures. And therefore, we have dedicated repositories for the different file types that work together in a federation that you see here. So for processes and analytics data, we have the Chemotion repository. We also have spectroscopy repositories like NMArchive, MassBank, and WIPSpec-DB. We have subdomain-specific ones like Stranda, Nomad, and SupraBank. And we have a multidisciplinary repository, Radar for Chem, that makes it possible to publish also very complex data sets of mixed type. Also large data can be published. And we also have associated repositories, so CSD and ICSD for the crystal structures. And we continuously evaluate the international landscape of repositories and check if there are new ones that we should onboard in this federation. So we do not only curate data, we also curate repositories, standards, ontologies, and terminologies. And you can look up our latest report where we check the international landscape of repositories in Re3 Data, which is a service where all the repositories are listed, and we check the chemistry repositories. And of course, we have a list of criteria, and you can see this list in our last report, and we will soon have another of these reports. Also, our repositories are recommended by many chemistry journals. And here you see that Wiley, for example, recommends our repositories in more than 30 chemistry journals. And this is pretty cool because it makes it a bit easier for us to convince the chemists to deposit the data in our repositories in the end. Here you see an example from Angewandte International Edition, and here also the NFDI for Chem repositories are pretty present. We are also curating standards, so we have a fair sharing collection that we maintain. So my colleague Christian Bonatto-Minella does this together with Egon Willighagen, and here you will find policies, standards, and databases, and it's a good place to check the relationship between standards and repositories, because this is often connected, and yeah, this is a good place to find out how. Now we go a bit into the details how the curation works in the different repositories. So Radar for Chem allows the fair publication of research data from all disciplines within chemistry. Here the users can easily publish all data types, all formats, and this complements the very subject-specific chemistry repositories that only are limited to a certain file type. And here we can guarantee a reliable maintenance of the data storage. So we have 3 geo-redundant copies, and we guarantee the data accessibility for 25 years at least. This service can be used free of charge, so no contract is needed, and it can be used independent of the institution, because Radar for Chem is based on the Radar repository, and for Radar, usually institutions have to make contracts, and this is clearly not the case for Radar for Chem to lower the hurdles for the chemists and convince them to use it. The curation works like this. So we have a really fine-grained rights and roles model in Radar for Chem, and the curator role is typically delegated to an expert within a research group. And why are we doing this? So because only an expert can do the evaluation of that special type of data and can guarantee the quality of the data and the metadata. And also another point is we integrated the journal review process in Radar for Chem, so it's easy to grant access to a data set for a short term for the reviewer before the data set is published. We have a cool metadata editor feature, so that suggestion of chemistry-specific terms. So if you type a term while you are annotating a data set, and this is a chemistry term, it will be automatically looked up in the terminology service of NFDI for Chem, and then you can, it's realized via a type ahead, and if it's recognized, you get a suggestion list, and you can choose a term from a certain ontology or terminology that you mean. Also, you can use terms from other disciplines like biology or the physical sciences and so on via the TS4NFDI service. And all this information is then clearly presented on the landing page together with additional information that is linked. And this fosters the semantic interoperability of the data and makes it easy to integrate it in things like knowledge graphs. Current work includes the AI-based metadata enhancement. So there we automatically extract terms from textual parts of the data, like the title, the description, but we also look into the data itself. So if we find a README file or a CSV that has maybe headers, then also there we can extract terms and map them automatically to ontologies and terminologies. And yeah, that makes it easy and less effort for the chemists to annotate data. Another point is AI-based fairness evaluation with a live feedback of the fairness scores. And I hope this will be an incentive for the chemists to do the metadata annotation, so provide richer metadata in the end, because they are, for now, most of the time only filling the mandatory fields. There's a screenshot of this type ahead that I mentioned. So here you see that someone typed chemical shift, and you have that term in many of the ontologies, so you can choose which one you really mean. And on the right side, you see the landing page, how it looks like after publication. So you have the whole context of that term linked. Now we come to the Chemotion repository. So Chemotion is a repository for samples, reactions, and related research data. And here, the curation routine includes several levels of data checking. So uploaded files are verified to ensure they use standard readable formats. So the data is then checked for completeness, consistency, and plausibility sort of automatically. And soon this will be further enhanced with support of large language models. There's a team of curators that supports this process, and currently 8 editorial reviewers handle most reviews, joined by additional reviewers from research groups that contribute to Chemotion. Another example is NMRchive, and here NMR data is curated through a semi-automatic workflow that combines automatic parsing and enrichment with a submitter review, and datasets here are uploaded, automatically processed, and checked for quality, and then further annotated. And the last example I want to show is StranderDB. So in StranderDB, it works a bit different. Here, enzyme data are submitted and checked for compliance, and then they are receiving a DOI. A data set or a data sheet can then be sent with the manuscript for a journal review, and after the paper is accepted, bibliographic details are added, and the data are validated, and the data set is published in StranderDB for the public access. And with that, we come to the general discussion.
Question you about Chemotion first as well. So, yeah, thank you very much. Have we got any questions for Felix specifically? I think it was interesting to see the different. I think there's some interesting variations on certainly the human in the loop in the sort of different databases as well. So I was just sort of trying to tease that apart in my head. Radar for Chem. I guess, to some extent you're talking about maybe with the metadata tool there's a bit more being pushed onto the researcher to add it, but you do also have your experts that you're delegating out to. How many sort of experts, you might have said it, but how many experts are you delegating out to for the Radar for Chem thing?
So this is growing. So usually we have one expert per workspace in Radar for Chem. So the workspace is a concept where a research team can work together in describing the data and preparing a data set for publication, so they can collaboratively work together. And in such a team, in such a workspace, usually we have one curator role. Sometimes there are many, and for now I think we have like 20 of these workspaces, but it's a new service, so this is growing rapidly.
Okay. Then with ChemMotion, you said there's a sort of team of curators, and I'm aware that, you know, there's instances of ChemMotion in lots of different institutions. So is that team of curators doing it for all ChemMotion instances, or?
I think you are referring to the ChemMotion electronic lab notebook.
Is that
and
what
I showed is the team
repository
of the repository.
Okay, so the repository is centrally
Exactly.
is central, so the ELNs are distributed, and then when it gets to the repository, then that's when you get the team coming in. Yep.
Can you talk more about the FAIR scores that you're assigning? Is that automatic based on what fields are filled in, or is someone else going in and evaluating that too? Because I'm just interested in that aspect of it.
Yes, so it's an automatic assessment, and we tried out several tools. And I mean, I would say the best fairness assessment tool that is out is the Fuji tool. I don't know if you know that. And I wanted to have that integrated, but the problem with that was it takes a lot of time for the evaluation, like sometimes 3 or 4 minutes, and that's not fast enough. So I wanted to have a live feedback, like I said, as an incentive to fill another field, right? So that you have sort of a preview. So if you would fill that extra field, your fairness score would change, would increase. And we used the FAIR metric, which is a bit different than the one Fuji uses. And this provides feedback not only as a number between 0 and 1, but it provides feedback for the F, the A, the I, and the R. So, yeah, that's pretty useful, I think.
Thank you. Any other questions, Jack?
I'm curious about who is submitting to all these repositories. Is it only German researchers, or are you open to anyone worldwide, or only the EU? Or?
So most of the chemists that submit are from Germany, but all over Europe there are also chemists submitting. So there's Oliver also present in the room. He was feeling sick yesterday, so but today he's there. Maybe he knows more about the user community, so I think it's mostly Europe for now. We have a few users, or at least requests from the US, and it's different in the different repositories if we may serve every user from everywhere, because we have contracts with the data centers, and we try to to optimize these contracts to offer our services for the whole world. But sometimes there are limitations in this regard. But we are open for everyone, and we want to make this possible in the future, for sure.
So unfortunately, I don't have exact numbers as well. But you can imagine, Felix showed this slide that we are well embedded in the author guidelines of many international journals. And therefore, we expect an increase also from international users. For example, the Journal of Natural Products highlights to submit NMR spectra to NM Archive. And from there, a lot of new data files are coming in. So the target group is not limited to Germany at all.
So I have one, thinking about, I guess this thinks about an FDI for Chem maybe in a slightly broader context. It's a project that's been running, for 4 or 5 years or so now. And I just wondered if you sort of observed enthusiasm for data curation as a result of all this work's going on, whether that be sort of more people submitting data sets and, for curation, but also more activity around curation, and whether you could tease apart, some of the factors that might have instilled that. You've obviously shown the workflows that are there to split, but there's a lot more to an FDI for chem around sort of culture change and stuff like that. So could you speak a little bit to how things might have changed over the past 5 years and what you think might have been the catalyst for those?
Yes, so I didn't focus on that in this talk, but yesterday in the other talk I mentioned it a bit. So yes, we are fostering the cultural change, as you said, or we are trying to do so. And of course, we have workshops and road shows where we showcase our services and so on. And also we teach the chemists how to do the curation, how to do the best metadata annotation and what's important and what's not so important. And we see an increased quality of the data and also an increased number of data submissions, I would say. Another important aspect is the use of electronic lab notebooks. So we are really trying to foster that, because if people use the lab notebook in an early stage of the research process, it's much less work in a later step to publish the data. So most of the curation can already happen there, I would say, if you do it carefully, and we try to teach this to the chemists.
Yeah. And that was one of the thoughts I thought early on when we're thinking about the long tail. It was one of the best ways to handle it. Get it all essentially curated from the very start, or as much as you can, and then takes the problems away. Okay. Any other questions for Felix? If not, we'll move on to some of the general discussion points we had. Thank you very much, Felix, and let's thank Felix, Nikki, and Shannon for the presentations. Okay. I don't think so. No. Unless you want to sit there, because I think this is as much hearing from the room as it is from anything else. So, and obviously, if there's other general questions that sparked, we don't have to be stuck to those. But I think kind of rooting this in, the RDA context. Hands up, who would class themselves as a physical scientist? Well, I suppose I should put my hand up. Yeah, you see, this is interesting. So, would further activity around physical sciences in RDA be beneficial? I mean, I guess this is we do want to reach out to other communities, but maybe of other communities we should be talking to, even if you're not physical scientists. And is it interesting to hear from physical sciences about what they're doing and what their challenges are? Is that a hand that's emerging?
I had a thought about that because I didn't realize I might be a physical scientist. So I work in agriculture and food, and we do a lot of things. We have like a library of wool clips from the last 30 years and all of the progeny data about those wools and their progeny, which includes genetics. So I was thinking sometimes the material that you're making data about, like wool, might be a way to attract others who don't self-identify as a physical scientist, but you realize, oh, I am handling something in the physical world and measuring that different ways. Similarly, we have grains and things like this in our organization's library archives. So I guess looking out the way you communicate, how you communicate it matters, that you might find, and I guess these areas are also are not as sophisticated in the way that they're thinking around data curation, because it's just a wool clip library. It's not like crystallography or NMR that has this long, a more well-established practice. So, yeah, I'm just from the outside as a thought.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting as well. I think it also inspires maybe a question that should have been on there, because we're talking about the long tail physical sciences. The other question I could put is, who considers themselves to be dealing with long tail of a particular domain? And yeah, any thoughts there on whether there's shared experiences and stuff that is be useful to make sure we have more global discussion about. That's from the earth sciences area, is that right? Yeah. sciences. Yeah.
Just based on what you had asked earlier, Ian, I think because there are so few people, it seems that way. There are so few people who have expertise in these domains in terms of data curation, maybe some sort of mentorship. I mean, something that I see that is continually problematic with data curators and librarianship is that most librarians come from the arts and humanities and social sciences. And so, you know, when we're hiring in data curators in our institutional repositories, they don't typically come with expertise in these areas, and that's been really an issue. But that being said, like our physical sciences expert now in the libraries learned on the job, and they're great, so.
I will follow on to that one. So I work for a oceanographic data repository and have a master's in oceanography. And most of the people in these disciplinary repositories come at this sideways from their domain of expertise, and they learn the data management aspects. Either they already have the ethos of really good data management, or it's instilled in them when they arrive at the repositories. And that's what we find. We look for people more domain trained first, and then try and help them drink the Kool-Aid, if you will. And then, but we have sought out people who have library science because there is typically a gap in there. And so I think it's a healthy balance, and I think these people are really hard to retain. And so I guess I naively thought there was already something within RDA's structure to look at fostering this type of persona. This really, for some reason I thought there was something already forming. Maybe it was in a BOF or an interest group or something like that. But I would be highly interested in something. I think there's something there.
Be able to provide context to that. It could be ignorance on my part too. Yeah.
Yeah, the Kevin Ashley Digital Curation Centre. I wasn't originally going to respond to that point. I had a different one, but given you raised it, I mean, so RDA does have groups, I mean, dealing with data curation as a profession in general, both, I think, those looking to define what it means and to to provide communities of people working in different domains, but all of whom one way or another are dealing with data curation. And there's a feeling that there is that common skill set that you can transfer between domains, even though you also need the domain knowledge, I think, to do the sort of things you're describing well. But one of the things that strikes me that perhaps about some of the challenges, and it may not be unique to physical sciences, but I'm seeing it more closely perhaps because of involvement with PSDI amongst other things, in that I was struck, for instance, Ian, by the way you were presenting just within crystallography, which is itself one small part of the whole domain we're talking about. There were 4 different repositories focusing on different types of crystallography. So that's divisions within divisions, as it were. But I mean, the advantage is those are global repositories. We're not talking about things of multiple instances in countries. I mean, PDB that's wherever you are in the world, that's where your protein structure, and similarly for what you're doing in Cambridge. But contrast that, but let's say with the social sciences, where I'm sure there is as many subdivisions within the social sciences as there is within the physical sciences. But in most nations, we see a social sciences data archive. That they're not being splittist, things are being put together. And I know even our experience within PSDI, there are so many different small collections of highly specialized subdomains of data, as it were. And specialized, for instance, as your collection of all clippings, which, and I don't know what it is that has brought that about, why it is that subdomains have this, and to what extent it is possible to get the kind of generality that we see in the social sciences data archives. I mean, I guess that's what you're trying to do in FDI for Ken. That's what we're trying to do in PSDI, but it feels like an unanswered question at the moment.
I'm trying to take both of these questions that I see on the slides. Myself, I'm thinking that we probably will be beneficial to switch out from the data and try to think about the research activity. We are very focused on data, and there is a lot of attention about the curation, which is good because it's the main part of the data. But inside a research activity, there are not data, just data. There is also a human part. And when you want data, 99% you have a software. And this software, it could be a software that you can reuse because it's already there, or you needed to create a new software because you needed to scale, and then you have this shift between the researcher that wants to become a software engineer, which is, for me, is totally wrong. It should be the researcher needed to produce the data, and a software engineer should produce the software that is guided by the researcher. Well, we need to do, and then you start to create a team where you have two persons that are working inside this team. So, looking from the outside, what I see there is we should start to shift between, look the curation from the outside. So the curation is not just the data, but at the scale. For example, the question that I raised before, it says you have 75 persons that are looking this file, looking this file. Well, if you give this information to a software engineer, can you create a test? I would say, I can do in a week. But we just listen that, if we use, for example, Fuji, that for me is a name for an apple, okay, it takes 3 minutes. Well, there is something wrong. How we can optimize this process? Well, probably someone can say, well, instead of to call an API every time to do the curation, we can take the software on board, and then the process will be much more faster. And then you have other skills that you have, for example, people that are more focused on the infrastructure, and then the team is going to growing. In order to have, for me, to have these data curations, you need to embrace more skills, and everyone should use the proper skills to do the proper job. You raised the question, who is a physical scientist? And we have just a few hands, but if we join, and let's join project, we are able to join all together all our skills, everyone in our own disciplines, you can have faster results, better research output, and research output at the moment is something else that we needed to have a look at, because at the moment the research output is just a paper, and it should not be just a paper. The research activity probably should need, this is my vision for the research activity, is like a film. Inside the film you have the main actors, which is the API, or all the contributors, but at the end you have all these end titles, and you see a huge amount of people and infrastructure and facilities and instruments. That is the entire, all this part is the curation that you have during the production of your film, in this case of the research activity. So we need to start to share more skills and not to pretend that a researcher needed to write the software, do the infrastructure, publish on there, and become also a cloud engineer. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's some interesting points there. And I think what neither Felix nor I in particular made explicit was probably the software development effort that's gone into enabling the workflows that we've talked about. And I'm not sure that's so evident in the data curation network, but if you were to start getting into automated workflows, then that becomes a thing. And I think what you're saying is, yeah, obviously there are the people who traditionally do data curation, but we might all be better served if we think more broadly around what other skills can we bring in that can help us do this. And I guess, again, with NFDF, again, you've got ontologists who don't necessarily need to be domain experts. They just need to be people who can grasp concepts and help come up with terminologies that might drive it. But yeah, the software development expertise that helps you automate the workflows and makes those activities more streamlined.
Because you have a lot of cross disciplines.
Yeah.
That's a role.
Yeah.
I mean, how you can share these skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to Kira and I'll come back to you. Just maybe
Hi, Kira McNeese, Cambridge University Press. Not entirely formulated thoughts here, but just thinking about the question of like, you know, social science repositories being much broader and then physical science repositories being a lot narrower, and this question of like, do we think about it by discipline versus by research activity? What I found working at Cambridge is we've got such a broad portfolio of journals, and what I found really interesting is that there are similar challenges across disciplines and fields that you would think would be totally unconnected in terms of data sharing. And often totally different fields, or people who would think of themselves as totally different kinds of researchers, will be collecting similar kinds of data that have similar curation needs. And I think the question earlier, when almost nobody raised their hand to say, I'm a physical scientist, but probably a lot of these people, the people in this room, have worked with kinds of data that might be considered to fall under that umbrella. So, I mean, what I certainly try to do in working across our communities and journals is to think about, well, what are the actual needs related to the data sets, regardless of what kind of field you consider yourself in. So as much as I appreciate this is a session about physical sciences, I think that, yeah, possibly thinking about, yeah, how do we, knowledge sharing and awareness raising, not just in physical sciences, but in terms of similar kinds of data sets, whoever might be generating them and using them and sharing them. If they think they're in social sciences or they consider themselves to be physical sciences, might be something to think more about or to focus a bit more on.
Hi, Southern Ocean Observing System, again, Michaela. I just wanted to, I suppose, share an example of the Southern Ocean is very multidisciplinary. We've got researchers from across international borders because it's international waters. And so we've got multiple different groups, multiple different disciplines. And to echo what you've just said of sitting across all of these working groups, I've noticed that everyone has the same problems, everyone has the same issues. There may be details that are domain specific, but the overarching issues with data and data curation are all the same. And so we've put together a data management subcommittee that kind of brings in both software engineers, data engineers, and then also the discipline specific types of expertise, so that we've got a wide breadth of people to draw on, so we can try to cover all of that and get to a real, I suppose, solution for this. We haven't figured it out, but just saying that essentially a group that kind of brings in all of those expertise has worked very well in our domain.
Oh, 2 minutes.
So I had the idea while I listened to all of your comments that maybe it would be good to study the workflows within the physical sciences, because I think there are types of workflows that have similarities, and there are other workflows that are, let's say, different at every experiment that you do, right? And if we can identify common workflows, we can maybe create tools like electronic lab notebooks or other kinds of softwares that you referred to, and yeah, that could be a benefit in the future.
Any final comments before we wrap up? Oh, sorry.
Nick Kostelev, Microscope Australia at UW Node. So just to further on comment on what you said, in the area that I'm currently working on as a data steward, I would say, the main problem that we're facing right now is very large data sets and the ability to track metadata in the actual workflow process from the beginning of creation of the data up to the point of publication or archiving or storage. And the common issue that the researchers are facing is the ability to, since they're working with different software, also sometimes proprietary software or custom software that they have written, there is no way to consolidate all this metadata together or be able to track all the files in the process of creation. And so what I was looking for is an ability to have a sort of an electronic notebook that is integrated into the operating system that the users are using that works similar to something like a Git type of a system that tracks changes between the versions of the files and also is able to consolidate all the metadata across the different changes of the versions. So if there is any going to be any more work into this area of having large data and also the ability to track the changes to the data with the view of metadata. That would be really helpful to everyone.
Right. Did you have something to say, Nikki? Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not really quite sure in terms of some of the mechanisms, but I just think in terms of some of the activities that people are doing and kind of this sharing of what is going on within some of the different projects. So where people are potentially building maybe a validation pipeline for a specific type of like data set, then obviously that being aware, because then obviously if another project thinks, yes, we're also doing that, can we just adopt the same to start to move people kind of towards similar kind of areas as opposed to then just reinventing the wheel. And I think like, yeah, where big projects are kind of doing that, hopefully kind of just having more awareness and obviously the DCM primers and then potentially being able maybe for other people to contribute into that and also elevate those, like those kind of easy wins where we can kind of share the stuff and help push it forwards in terms of where people are, yeah, integrating this stuff like themselves.
Absolutely, thank you. Shannon? Yep.
Please create more primers. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think they're important because they're the blueprint for what you might want to work into more sophisticated processes and things like that. So yeah. So yes, so the questions were completely wrong. And, you know, this is long tail of physical sciences. It's more probably about the long tail and the experiences we share and how we can try and bring some kind of order and process to those. And so thank you all very much for your contribution to the discussion. I think it gives us something to go away and think about and look at what's going on across RDA, the other communities, and think, you know, if we are going to sort of contribute further to this, where do we bring these conversations? Because I think we do have a lot to learn from each other, has been evidence here. So with that, thank you for your contributions. Thank you to my fellow speakers. Thank you.